Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk to you about a book I read recently that might just be one of my favorite reads of the year so far. And if you've been around my channel for a little while, you might know that I am a huge fan of sad love stories, and Pavane for a Dead Princess by Park Min-gyu definitely qualifies. But don't worry, that's not a spoiler, because this book begins at the end with the final parting of a young couple standing together at a bus stop in the snow. And from there, it circles back and traces the whole course of their brief and unlikely romance. The title of this novel comes from a piano piece by French composer Maurice Ravel, but the story unfolds in Seoul over the winter of 1985 to 1986, and the setting here is crucial because it means that our characters are about a generation removed from the hardship and deprivation of the Korean War and are instead coming of age amid all the commercial spoils of South Korea's post-war economic boom. And against this backdrop of rapid modernization, all of the preoccupations of contemporary life, including a fixation on wealth and consumption and physical beauty, feel more blinding and more oppressive than ever. And at the center of all of this is our unnamed narrator, a handsome young parking lot attendant who falls for a similarly unnamed and very ugly department store girl. And this girl is not just plain in a Jane Eyre sense. She is strikingly, breathtakingly ugly in a way that arrests the attention of everyone around her and plagues her every movement. And sadly, this premise of a conventionally attractive man falling for an egregiously ugly woman is so uncommon that it seems almost fantastical, or like something out of a twisted fairy tale. When these two walk down the street together holding hands, people stare, and the sight of them together is seen as almost unbelievable or unseemly. And while their romance is certainly the heart and anchoring force of this novel, the exceptionally mismatched nature of their relationship also makes it a lens through which Park Min-gyu can explore broader themes and ideas. Because at ground level, the hyperbolic gulf between the narrator's beauty and the girl's wretchedness is certainly meant to provoke and to destabilize the reader's assumptions about what a love story should look like. And in its loudest and most didactic moments, this novel is something of a polemic, and throughout, Park rages against the shallowness of Korean society and against the rampant fetishization of material wealth and physical beauty. He depicts daily life in Seoul as being something like a video game with unending levels in which no amount of beauty or wealth or success will ever be enough. And many of Park's frustrations are voiced often in monologue by the narrator's friend Johan, who at one point laments, "They study and study, then they die. First place, then they die. Money, money, then they die." It is a system that demands much and rewards few and punishes those who cannot or choose not to keep up. And the narrator, Johan, and the girl are all outliers in their own way. The narrator because he's dropped out of school and has failed to capitalize on his good looks, Johan because he's too angry and introspective, and the girl, of course, because she wasn't born with a beautiful face. And it's important to note that her ugliness is never actually described in detail in the text. Instead, it's always defined by other people's perceptions and reactions to her. For Park, beauty and ugliness are created entirely in the minds and eyes of other people. But while the girl's ugliness may be constructed, her sufferings are very real. Her appearance makes it difficult for her to find work and be promoted. She's socially ostracized, and because of that, she often speaks quietly and keeps her head bowed down most of the time. And even when she does laugh or smile, she's often told not to because it makes her look worse. And yet, these three characters are able to come together and form a close-knit friendship that serves as a kind of refuge from the harsh outside world. And while these characters' circumstances may represent certain extremes of Korean society, this is more than just a one-dimensional social satire. Instead, Park seems to be deeply interested in the real emotional and human toll of living in such a shallow and flimsy world. His vision of Seoul is a glossy but soulless urban landscape where individuals are locked into vicious cycles of shame and envy and upward clawing. It is a world that flattens dreams, limits the capacity to love freely, and narrows people's ability to imagine all the different possibilities that could constitute a good or successful life. And amidst all of this rampant social and professional striving, our narrator, for his part, is caught in this kind of endless existential malaise, riding the same subway line that loops around and around the city over and over again without ever actually going anywhere. And there's a certain passivity to these characters that can sometimes be frustrating. This is also the period in Korean history that is marked by mass demonstrations and violent student protests, but none of the characters in this book participate in any of that. Instead, you get the sense that modern life has numbed their senses and zapped their energy, leaving them in a kind of paralyzed stasis with nothing to fight for and nothing to believe in. And yet, the simple act of loving each other and the relationship between the narrator and the girl in particular does feel like its own kind of radical transgression. And with his central romance, Park seems to be making a case for the ordinary, because beyond their noteworthy appearances, the narrator and the girl are both unremarkable, almost to the point of being forgettable. And the fact that neither of them is ever named in the book just reinforces their anonymity. Park allows us to feel all of their boredom and their pain and their longing, but as full and distinct characters, they never quite come together and remain kind of translucent for the reader. But they see each other, and although the girl is only ever referred to as her throughout this book, when the narrator writes about her, it is italicized and has its own quiet emphasis. And in a world where relationships are so often commodified and transactional, that act of falling in love, in easy, ordinary, unremarkable love, feels almost revolutionary for these characters. And it's interesting to note that their romance unfolds over the course of a brief winter, a season that so often signifies death and the end of things. During that winter, they go to visit some old palaces in the city, and although they are not nearly as beautiful in November as they would be in the spring or the summer, looking back on that time, the narrator says, "My heart is still caught in the winter of that year, because whether it was in the old palace courtyard or at the entrance to the squalid farmer's market, the sun we saw that winter, the small orange sun we caught in the winter's naked tree branches, is something I can never forget. It was all the love I had." When he's with the girl or when he's with Johan, the narrator feels as if he's living a good enough life. And although that sounds anti-romantic, for him it is simple and beautiful and profound. And part of what makes this book so compelling and so moving is Park's real belief in the power of that simple and often fleeting beauty. This book is deeply nostalgic and is written from the perspective of the narrator looking back on his youth. And while leaning too heavily on nostalgia can sometimes be a cheap way of building pathos in a story, I think that it's very effective here because Park does an excellent job of rendering with painful clarity all of the almost tragic contradictions of youth, the beauty and the boredom of it, the endless open horizons of youth, and the agonizing paralysis of not knowing what the future holds. And the one thing that hangs over this book above all else is the enormity of everything you don't know and cannot know when you're young. I do want to say a brief word about the ending of this novel, so mild to medium spoilers up ahead. The ending of this book is sentimental almost to a fault, and at certain moments it careens almost into full-on schmaltz, which I can see being a problem for some readers, which is fair enough. But I also also think that Park knows what he's doing with this ending, because in the last 30 or 40 pages, the book takes a kind of metatextual turn that manages to deliver a fairy tale-esque ending, a commercial ending, you might say, while simultaneously denying the viability of any such happily ever after. It is an ending of severance and separation, and yet it is hopeful and suggests that love opens a door to different possibilities in different worlds. And I also have to give this novel credit because it is the only book in 2018 that made me openly sob alone in my apartment at 1 a.m. And for that reason alone, I of course have to recommend this book. As always, if you have any recommendations for other sad love stories, please send them my way. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!